Good morning, and how are you this morning? We are at the first official plenary of HIV is Not a Crime, the training academy being held here at Indiana University. I'm among a very boisterous crowd of grassroots activists from all over the United States, and in fact, all over the world, considering 7 countries are represented here today among the people here trying to modernize, change, or get rid of laws that criminalize people living with HIV. You're going to find out a lot more about that this morning because you're going to hear some very personal stories from people who have been prosecuted or served time for no other reason than their HIV status. Let me give you a scenario, for instance. We have a lot of people, for instance, who are serving time right now who did not disclose their status to a sexual partner. But disclosure, of course, is their context is involved. In other words, was there any risk? Did the person use protection? Was the person they were having sex with ever at any risk at all? Of course, we know now with things like undetectable equals untransmittable, many people are never at risk. However, these activists don't even care so much for that debate because for them, for us, no viral condition should be criminalized. The worst form of stigma is when it is written into the law and when we say that this group of people with this immutable characteristic have a different set of laws and different penalties than does everybody else. That sets up a very troubling circumstance. We have one of our speakers today will be calling in live from prison where he is serving a 30-year sentence for potential exposure to a sexual partner, even though he did not have a viral load. He used a condom. So he did everything he could to protect his partner. We know the difficulty of disclosure in a world filled with HIV stigma. So this man did everything he could to protect his partner. No infection happened. There was never any risk of that. And he was sentenced to 30 years. He hasn't even served 10 of those yet. And yet you're going to find this man, Kerry Thomas, to be one of the most inspirational speakers you may have ever heard at a conference because despite this, despite the fact that he is serving time for nothing more than his HIV status, he is almost a poetic man with a sense of justice and a sense of helping other people. And in fact has doing that now in the opportunity that he has in prison. We're beginning a segment now where they're going to be doing some general announcements. And while they're doing that, I'm going to bring in Edwin Bernard, the executive director of the HIV Justice Project. Edwin. Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. I know they're just starting some announcements, so I wanted to help set the scene. Again, I still feel like this feels like Sports Center. You know, the big game is about to begin, and we're the pundits, which is as close as I'll ever get to a jock reference.
That's very true. I mean, there's again so much energy in the room this morning, and there's so much anticipation about what the first session is going to be. This survivors panel. You've already talked about Kerry Thomas. There's going to be a surprise, again, someone new who's actually currently just being investigated. A young guy from Florida who's going to talk about what it's like to be
And you know, I've heard about that man, and what's amazing about that is that he is in the process of being investigated. He does not know what awaits him, and yet he's got the guts to come up here and talk about the threat of prosecution he's under.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that we can't underestimate is the incredible courage that it takes to tell your story in public. And I had a quick conversation earlier because I asked him, are you okay not only talking to the auditorium but to the Facebook audience? And he said, sure, you know, whatever, you know, I'm prepared because this is a really important issue.
There are a lot has been made, and it's really true that this entire movement is being driven largely by people living with HIV ourselves.
That's true. I'm living with HIV. You're living with HIV. So most of the leaders of the networks and the organisations that we're working with, that have put on this meeting, this training academy, are all living with HIV. obviously the personal is political, but it goes much bit more beyond that, because we understand that, and as I think Sean Strube has said this so many times, but it's true, particularly here in the US, where the laws are so overly broad and vague. You really are just one disgruntled ex-partner away from an investigation, an arrest, and a prosecution.
And lay that scenario out for people. Lay out that scenario that people understand. One disgruntled boyfriend, whom you may or may not have disclosed to, you'll never know, because it's a he said, she said thing. So one person gets pissed off at you, and you could be in deep legal doo-doo.
Yeah, so the problem with so many of the laws here in the United States is that they are based on stigma and not science, and they're just basically non-disclosure laws. The only defense is, in fact, that you disclose to your partner before any kind of sex or anything that could have risked exposure transmission. Now, how on earth do you prove that? So it's actually very easy. I just heard of my former neighbor in Berlin told me about a family member who is living in a place where, in fact, those laws don't exist, but he's still was told that he's going to be blackmailed because he's going to say, you didn't disclose that you had HIV. Mm-hmm. This is the problem, that even where the laws don't exist, it doesn't really matter. If people think that you can control, retaliate, abuse, punish a former partner that you've broken up with, or you just didn't like, or you had a bad experience with, just because they have HIV, it's so easy to treat us as if we are just, second-class citizens and immutable characteristics we can't change, and the law is basically not on our side.
And again, driven by, I always say AIDS activism is driven by those with the most to lose. And in this case, it's people living with HIV ourselves, with the most to lose. And when you look around this room, you realize that it's also being driven, by and large, by people living with HIV who are people of color, who are transgender, who are dealing with every aspect of the HIV crisis at a more intense level, including criminalization.
Yeah, I think that's the point that Naina made so beautifully. This concept of intersectionality, it's so real here in the United States, where the bodies of people who are black or brown or different.
I'm sorry, we're having a major, well, there's a riot breaking out over whether or not you can bring coffee into the auditorium. It's early, and everyone would like to be a little more caffeinated than they are.
Yeah, it's true. I've had 2 cups already, so my goodness, it looks like things are starting now.
It looks like we're beginning the program, so we'll take it there. And thank you for watching HIV is Not a Crime Training Academy live stream.
Community and in conversation with us about our shared objectives and goals. We have a very full day, as you know, if you have read the agenda. I want to especially welcome the people out there in the virtual world. Thank you for watching the live stream. We want you to feel that you are fully a part of this event. So please, if you have questions, please post them. We will incorporate them and you throughout the day. And thank you for coming to visit with us. There is no substitute for, and there's nothing more valuable or important than the lived experience. And I am privileged to now turn over our first panel of the morning, the Survivors panel, to Robert Suttle.
Thank you, Allison, and good morning to everyone for being here. And we look forward to having a pretty good start this morning. I would like to take this moment to remember a survivor that has recently passed. Reginald Brown touched on this on yesterday with David Plunkett. I actually had the pleasure of speaking with David a few years back when I first got into this work. early on, he was currently at that time going through his own situation in the state of New York. And I'm sad to hear of his passing so suddenly, as I'm sure a lot of us were. But I wanted to just take a moment of silence. Reginald did read a piece that David had written for an exhibit called exhibition that's going on called Cell Count, that's happening currently in New York City. And I also contributed a narrative to that exhibit as well. So Reginald read a piece of his work yesterday, so I just wanted to not repeat it, but at least have a moment of silence just to remember David Plunkett, who was an HIV criminalization survivor. Okay, thank you. You are among people who have been victims of HIV criminalization, either prosecuted or threatened with prosecution. Several of us are presently awaiting trial or sentencing, in the process of appealing our convictions, or waiting to learn whether or not charges filed will be carried through to prosecution. There are many people who are currently still facing prosecutions here in this country, in various states that we all live in. There may be even some that are among us that is not here on this stage at the moment. And you may never know. You know, they may not be convicted, but they're presently going through current experiences. And I just want you to just be mindful of that, you know, as we're talking about that. Because although for three of us up here, we've kind of made it through, but there are people still today and right now that are currently facing uncertain outcomes, and we just need to lift our hearts and minds to just be mindful of what HIV criminalization really does to an individual, to our community, and basically to our lives. Each situation is different, of course, but one thing we all share is the profoundly stigmatizing effect of HIV criminalization and the harm it has done to us, our families, and our future. Today, we're going to have some testimony from a person who has not really been criminalized. However, they are a person living with HIV who is currently facing a situation that could eventually end in a prosecutorial outcome. And the rest of us will, between Monique, Ken, and myself, who you know our stories, if you've read them, you've heard them over and over again, but we wanted to talk about the next step. Yes, we survived it, and now we can go on, but really, can we? And so our goal is to really share with you that, yes, we've been through it. Some of us have been prosecuted, others may not have, but the criminalization experience continues to carry on in our lives every day, each and every day, and we want you to know what that feels like. And also, we're going to have Kerry Thomas. We're going to call Kerry this morning at the IDAHO Correctional Center. So we're going to get some comments from people who are here presently on stage before 9:30, because that's the time that we will call Kerry. So hopefully we'll have good communication and strong signal with him this morning so you all can hear his voice. And also, if you have questions for any of us, to be able to provide your questions. So I want to start out with, I'll introduce you all to a young man. I'll actually let him introduce himself. But his name is Ariel. He's from the state of Florida, and he is a person living with HIV. Yes. Florida, are you in the house? So I'm going to let him introduce himself in his own way and just share a little bit about what impact has HIV criminalization have on your life today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ariel. I am a student at Florida State University, and woo, go Noles! Okay. So my experience with this was that, you know, it's college. We do a lot of silly stuff, and to me, you know, it was just a good time on a Saturday night and it wasn't anything serious. We just went home and, you know, had a bit of fun. And I was dating this guy, and after a couple of weeks, I thought, okay, wow, he's really cool, and I want to pursue something more with this guy, potentially, maybe even if it's just casual dating. So I told him, I'm like, hey, by the way, I'm HIV positive. And he freaks out on me, saying, like, I've been really sick for a couple days. And I'm like, hey, listen, you're fine. Like, there was no way anything that we did that could have potentially exposed you. And even if we did, I am undetectable. And I had sent him all the information, all the CDC, all those articles, and he just wasn't having it. So I thought that he would just forget about it and live on with his rage at me, and he just cut communications with me, and I thought that would be the end of it. But come February, I get a letter on my student email saying that I had been, there were some allegations made about me under Title IX. If you're familiar with Title IX from university, it deals with sexual misconduct. And I was being charged with sexual exploitation. So I read this and I'm like, what? What? Sexual exploitation? What? I don't know. I don't even know what that means. So I come into the hearing and they show me the report that was made against me. And it was very, very stigmatizing. I mean, he submitted my Grindr profile and said, look at this guy, he's still on here, he's still exposing people, he's putting people at risk, and I just want to protect my community. And I thought, you want to protect your community and this is how you're going to do it? That's protecting? Okay. But he even brought in his roommate to make the same charge against me. And I honestly thought, like, this is it. Like, I'm over. I'm done. Like, you know. But thankfully, he did not file a police report. It was just under the university. And I'm really grateful for that, because otherwise, you know, I might not be here. But so I'm going through the process right now of he told his side of the story. I told my side of the story. Now we're doing a hearing, which I will go before the judge, and he will go before the judge. And they're pretty much, you know, they're going to decide what they're going to do with me. And there is no HIV-specific amendment or law under Title IX. Under Title IX, it just falls under the general category of sexual misconduct. So it's really up to the judge's discretion what they want to do with me. But you know, it's really interesting because they didn't even know what Grindr was. Like, I was having to explain to them what, like, you know, it's like I'm talking to this 50-year-old white lady, and I'm like, she's like, what's top? And I'm like, listen. You know, like, they just don't understand. They just don't know. And so I'm having to educate them. I'm having to educate the person that made his allegations against me, and that's how I ended up here. And you know, I've had people around me that were tried in Tallahassee, where I'm going to school at, and he's in jail now. So I thought I needed to do something about that. Yeah.
We love you.
Thank you, Ariel, for definitely sharing that and enlightening people that, you know, that HIV prosecutions can arise in any kind of situation and eventually can end up as a criminal, with a criminal outcome. And it goes to show you there's just a vast way that HIV criminalization can just impact our lives, whether it's at school or whether it's just in other intimate situations outside of sort of school or work or whatever. But I will say that for you, I feel like this is a great first step in terms of looking at it in a positive way for yourself, standing up for yourself, and recognizing the impact that by living with HIV has on you, that the risk that it puts you and how people see you and view you, even when they don't understand sort of the, I guess, lifestyle or the way people living with HIV live, which is in essence no different than anybody, in the way anybody lives, whether HIV positive or not. So just wanted to thank you for sharing your story with us this morning. Okay, so we still have some time to talk about some other stuff. So we're not gonna, I want this to be more of a sort of empowering and inspiring session. And so I'm gonna move right into talking about us. Those of us have actually faced these prosecutions and have been incarcerated even. Some of us are carrying convicted felon criminal records and labeled felons, and also having to register as a sex offender. And so, yes, we survived it, Monique and Ken. We did. We survived it.
Yes.
Yeah. But now we can go on. But can we really go on? How do you feel about that? Can you really go on? Have you been able to go on since sharing your story through HIV is Not a Crime, the short film, and many interviews and articles? Have you been able to really go on? And what has that been like for you since sharing?
Able to go on. It still continues to follow us. Even though we have moved on with our lives, HIV criminalization still follows us when it's still on our record, when we're still being labeled as criminals. But we are not criminals. I believe that we are the expert of our own power. We are the expert of our own voice. We are the expert of our own strength. And this is a new season. I'm not gonna continue to live in the past. I know what I did, but I'm here to bring about change. I'm here to allow my voice to be heard as a Black female who has been criminalized. When there's unity, there is strength. And when we come together in spaces like this, you all help us. We are not criminals, but we are human beings that deserve to be respected, and we deserve to be treated just like anybody else. So I have been able to move forward because my voice has been stronger, and my voice will continue to rise, and I will continue to stand that these laws will be changed. I am a proud mother. HIV criminalization did not stop me from doing a new adoption. HIV did not, HIV criminalization did not stop me from doing anything that my mind and my heart was willing to do. We need to change these laws. We have moved forward. We're not going backwards, and we're not going nowhere.
Amen.
I'm just saying.
That's fine. Yeah, really, how do you follow that? But I don't have to follow that because it has been because of, these two and literally so many people in the room that we have been, and we've been talking about this. How do we go forward? Because I'm telling you, every day there's still a struggle. We try to escape it. We lift each other up. We cry on each other. We get the random phone calls going, holy shit, not again today, or this just happened. Something else raised its ugly head. You've tried to move forward. We have. She's done, the moving things forward. I ran for office last year. So, it was, where is he? Yeah, he's there on his phone. He won't put his head up. Sean's sitting there. He was like, I told him to do it. It was at home, and I thought I was going to make it through, and at the nth hour, they played the HIV card. Yeah. But they don't realize, I'm a very, very blunt person, I'm a New Yorker, the shitstorm that they created when they did that. That was empowering for me because it is hometown, it is small town, but people, the feedback I got, literally the positive was more than the negative. So that was really incredible. So sure, I didn't get it, but boy, did they know I'm there, and they know I'm not gonna be quiet. My case, each one of us is different. We can each tell you about that. Mine really kind of came to an end really in June of 16. So I've only had about a year and a half of like, okay, how do I start healing? But then my case being different, the UCMJ piece, you'll hear us talk about it. It is so unique. I will always have what I call bites at the apple. Because if I can get Barbara Lee and other great people like that to get language in the NDAA, to get one of the HIV repeal measures passed in Congress, I get another bite at the apple. So that's another piece. They have pulled the tiger's tail, because they know I'm not going away. The new Secretary of the Army knows my name. He ignores me constantly, but he knows I will not go away, and I'm not going to go away. So those are the things we've done, trying to go back to school, trying to continue in education. Some great people, I'm looking, at Laurel there, encouraging me to write an abstract, and my abstract got approved for international AIDS. I'm still overwhelmed by that. Yep. And that allows us to take our message, not just, locally, nationally, but to an international stage to help people like Edwin, to help others. I spoke to a woman last night. It was her first time. I did my little after hours interview. And it is the power of the space, that we are sitting in this space and we have survived. I don't want anybody to have to go through what we went through. I got locked in the hallway the other day. Cindy signed in. I said, I got locked in the hallway accidentally. The doors were locked. And I'm telling you, this 50-year-old white guy freaked out. It hadn't happened in a long time. That's never happened. And I got locked and I couldn't get out. It was like 20 minutes. And I freaked out. And I'm like, holy Christ, what is wrong with you? Realizing that those stigmas and the trauma in the back of my brain, that I'm thinking, this big guy. I freaked out in the hallway the other day. Here. So we are very powerful together, and we're more powerful together because of you, that we're moving forward. So I know that's what we want to do, and that's why Robert was so brilliant to come up with this idea of going, our stories. Please tweet the hell out of that Rolling Stone article, because that made a huge impact. We're going forward, and it's because of you, and we want to help sure that your state laws don't do this to somebody else. Don't let this happen. Stand together, fight them, scream and yell, kick them, without getting an assault charge. But, tell them that we're not going to go away. And that's why we're still here. Yeah.
And as for me, you all have really, I guess in a way, watched me walk out my next steps in my life, because honestly, I did not know what I was going to do with my life being there in prison. And I will say that, of course, meeting Sean, the way we met, by me finding the blog online and calling him and speaking to him, and we were, maybe 20 miles away from each other. He didn't know me, I didn't know him, but we're on the phone. And I would say that meeting Sean, of course, has given me purpose in this work. And through everything that I've done through SERO, you all have watched that. Whether at a conference, whether at a meeting, in an interview, anything that I've done, you all have watched it. I have pretty much put my life out there around this, around HIV criminalization, and it's not something that I regret. In fact, it's what I intended for it to do, and I'm grateful for that. However, by you knowing our stories and our experiences, we had lives before this ever happened. We have lives before this ever happened, and I can speak for me, and maybe you all agree that we in some essence want to get back to that, or at least part of that. For me, it's been like going back, remembering who I was before this happened, and also looking at who I am today, and blending and putting them together, and saying, who am I right now? And that is something that I'm continuing to work on as I move forward. I don't mind sharing my experience, but I'm not just my experience. There's a lot more to me than what you've seen. And right now I'm just trying to, rediscover myself in this new space that I am in, because of the stigmas and the labels and the things that we've been given because of this experience. And so I also want to say, and please, you all can just chime in anytime, the issues around, we still face struggles around employment, our earning potentials, housing. It's at times it's challenging to move around. If you're going to move, at least for me, I've had to move at least twice, 3 times maybe. And I've always been concerned about whether or not I'm going to be able to secure, a place to live, because you just never know when that question may pop up. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? And of course, I have a way of addressing that, but you begin to realize that your life is not normal when you have to realize, like, oh man, I got to answer this question, and how do I do that? And what impact would that have on me? Being honest and public about that, have on my ability to secure housing. I will say that thankfully I've not had any problems, and I'm really grateful for that. But there are just things that you don't see. Right. You see the advocacy, you see us talking and engaging in that kind of thing, but when we go home, you don't know the struggles and things that we have to deal with just in normal everyday things. Some other things, like around travel. There's times where we are being detained in customs. Ken, I think you said you were detained for hours, right?
5 hours.
5 hours. Can you believe that?
5 hours. And I put that on the listserv. That just recently they have opened up an ability, you have to pay $100, non-refundable, to be granted an interview, if they choose to interview you, to see if you really are a bad person, that they'll take you off of the watch list and not be detained. So that's what I'm trying to do to make sure I go to Amsterdam, because when I came home from Africa, they detained me for 5 hours, didn't tell me a word, just locked me in a room and made me sit there. So I don't want to do that again in Amsterdam. But I used to travel, of course, all over the world. And it's little things like that I have to plan that. Literally planning that, I can't have family members waiting outside the airport for me. They sat there for 5 hours and they take your cell phone, the whole 9 yards. You have no communication. So little things like that, they're just amazing, that even movement, restrictive movement. Let me just say, so there's a wonderful woman, Evie Litwak, that I've been able to join in with. If you've seen some of the pieces, it's called Witness to Mass Incarceration. She is reaching out, and she's reached out to just a full spectrum of people, very heavy, leaning towards covering women and the mass incarceration of women. But she got a grant, and we're working on a very large project to talk about the continuation that the United States, under our punitive system, we continue to punish. We say you did a bad thing, got it. We know we can all probably define what's a bad thing. Time out, go over here, take a break, however you judge that. But when they're done, we continue to punish. That's just one aspect of it. The sex offender registration thing, I will say it now, that is our next greatest challenge as a community. It is just for both the sex workers, and we will say that now, maybe talk about Tiffany. And there's my lady right there, Chris. I love her, absolutely. Tiffany was supposed to be with us. And Tiffany is not here, not because of her choosing, not because we didn't try. Tiffany's process, and it's the continuation of the punishment. What's that? Oh, in the mic, sorry. I'm on the side. I don't need a mic. Where's Kerry? I don't need a mic. But Tiffany isn't here with us because of the process. She had great support from her parole officer. She had great support from, the people that are supposed to be helping manage her. Because if you've been through trial, one of the most disgusting words they ask us at sentencing is rehabilitative potential. I will never forget them asking all these friends and family members, well, what's Ken's rehabilitative potential? Really? Are you serious? That's rehabilitative potential for Tiffany. And she is locked down. The sex offender registration that's been thrown on that poor woman. She has a child. She can't move. They didn't want to put her in a civilian hotel because of the potential there were going to be kids there. It goes on and on and on and on. And that's the only reason Tiffany is not with us, is because this continuation of punishment. And somehow this society, and we're all part of this culture, says it's okay. Most of the times because it hasn't happened to them yet. That famous saying, I don't know who came up with it, HIV is a crime, you care, but you just don't know yet. You can apply that to almost everything. We seem to turn a blind eye until it happens to us. But please think of Tiffany. We're going to try to call her in, so that was just a shout out. But Tiffany should be sitting with us. She should be here with us because this was her chance to be with the tribe, to be with the network, to be with people that can love her, lift her up, and show her how to survive. So please, if you have any contact with her, if you want to, if you're in that area, there are people like that out there that need it.
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, most times when people have criminal records or having to register as a sex offender, some of them have not been able to leave the state in which they are in. And in some ways, I know I feel I am privileged, or have been privileged, to be able to just move about this country. But it just goes to show you the range in which people are impacted. based on their past. And they're great advocates that we've captured some of their stories, but they've just not been able to travel, like Monique and Ken and myself. And so we have to continue to speak up and speak out, because there are still people who are still bound by those restrictions that many of you don't have to think about, don't think about, and mainly because you don't know. And that's why it's important to hear from us, so that you can have a better understanding that when you're advocating in your state, remember the people. Remember who you're fighting for. If you're personally with HIV, you're fighting for yourself, and if also you're within this community, we're fighting for each other. You know, we really are. And that's why I do my best to always remind people, who are we talking about here? We're talking about us. We're really talking about us, and it just makes me sick in my stomach. You know, for the example with Tiffany, because there's no reason for that. They're treating her like she's the worst person in the world. And it's not, and she's not. And many of you may have know Tiffany Moore. She actually was at Grinnell. She was at Grinnell. Yep. So she was able to make it then, but since then a lot has happened in terms of circumstances, and now she's not able to. But there are many other survivors that I wish could participate in this, but they're not able to. Right. And that's why we have to continue to fight and do our best to get those laws changed in each state. Because, and I have this sense of urgency because it is important. These people, they're living every day bound based on something that happened many years ago. And it's up to us to try to do our best to move reform as fast as we possibly can, talking and educating the community and legislators about what people have to deal with. You know, so I say this to say, don't get so bogged up around disclosure and all that, you know, stuff that keeps us going in circles and circles with talk with really no solution or outcome. But understand that to think higher and to think about the impact that these laws have on people's lives, because that's really what matters. Because it could be any of us. It could be any of us at any day, any time. And I've actually engaged with many people who are currently facing prosecutions and actually have sat in sessions, workshops around HIV criminalization, and now they're finding themselves in that situation. So, and just hearing that just made me feel really bad, because it's like, oh my God, you know, they got one, you know, got one of us. And I'm just praying for a good outcome for those that are currently going through, that their cases can be dismissed, and they can try to do the best to move on with their lives. And so I want to ask you, Ariel, share with us some of the positives that you've kind of developed as a result of this current thing that's going on. I mean, you've also been able to engage with other leaders, young leaders. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm from Honduras originally. My family immigrated here 8 years ago. You know, some of us are undocumented, so I focused on that mostly for, you know, my time during school as an advocate, and I've kind of ignored my HIV diagnosis. But after this happened, I was like, I can't ignore this anymore. It's like a pain in my back, and I gotta address it somehow, because I was on meds, whatever, but I wasn't really dealing with it, you know what I mean? Like, I just kind of ignored it and didn't talk about it. And I was like, okay, I'm done. I know what I'm good at. I know that I like going out into networking and meeting people, and I had a close relationship with Rene Garcia. He's a legislator that worked, you know, with this kind of stuff, and I know that I had access to what I needed to do. So I actually wrote to Sean Struve when this happened. I was like, hey, I need your help. I read your book. I know that you do this criminalization thing. And he actually responded. You were like in the UK, I think, when you like answered your phone. Yeah. And he was like really, really, he was just really nice. I was like, wow, I just didn't expect that. I was like, wow, you don't even know me. Like, I'm just some random person in Florida, you know? So I was like, wow, like, if that's what's behind this, then like I want to be a part of that. So I told my case manager, I was like, hey, like hit me up with any opportunities that have come to me, and he sent me to NMAC, the BY Log program. Yes. Yes, building young leaders of color. I had a great time. I mean, it was like a life-changing experience, really, and I felt rejuvenated after that. And also, like, meeting people my own age, because I didn't know anybody my age that had HIV, and like meeting people my age that were going through the same thing that I was going through, and were also passionate, about changing their communities and doing what they had to do. And from there, I also, wrote again to Sean Straub. I was like, hey, if any opportunities available, let me know. And that's kind of how I ended up here. And I'm glad, because it needs to be addressed, in all kinds of, and I feel like I really enjoyed the aspect of yesterday when they talked about intersectionality. And it's like, I don't have to choose if I want to advocate for immigration or HIV. I can do both.
Absolutely.
I have to do both, right?
See, you're making an impact already in this day too, right? Well, great. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad that you're beginning to find the silver lining in this, even though you're not out of it just yet. But I think this will give you strength to continue to go forward, wherever path it leads and the outcome. You'll be stronger in the end for it. And I think they're all, Monique can
Absolutely.
definitely attest to that, that you will eventually find strength, because I just didn't know. I didn't know what I was going to do. And you all have no idea. I think that's why I have the passion that I do, because I know that I couldn't be here. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for connecting with Sean and just, I guess maybe just having some hope, some sense of hope that it was going to be better. But when you're in this, you never know how it's going to be better.
Yep.
And some ways you have to try to create the betterness for yourself, right? And as best as you possibly can. Ken, you talked about your the Rolling Stone article. Many people may not be familiar with what that was like. So tell us about how that came about for you.
Sure. Actually, it was Catherine Hansen's. Catherine forwarded Rolling Stone and Joseph Jafar. He wanted to cover, he's a pretty good writer. I mean, pretty good, he's brilliant. I love him. But he had expanded into the social justice aspect and really picked up on HIV. And I don't know where he heard about it, but he heard about this thing of HIV in the military. And it was quite funny because he took the train up and came up to Otisville, up by where Sean and I live. And, kind of like, oh my God, where am I? And he drove around and got to, really spend all day with me. And we then hooked him up with Reese and Quinn, the two of Elizabeth Taylor's grandchildren, because they live close by, and we went down to the city, had a great panel. And Joseph ended up writing that article after really going after the government. Yeah, he really did. He did a full investigative report similar to what ANU did, which was brilliant for me, obviously, because our stories are complicated. They're complicated, Sex, no sex, did you, how do you expose? The ignorance is just bliss. So when he wrote that, it went, of course, Rolling Stone. Just aside, it was really funny. I had high school friends going, we always knew you'd make Rolling Stone, but they go, but we're really sorry it was for that, trying to make light of it. But the Rolling Stone article took our story to just a stupid level. I still get notes on Facebook, that I don't know are there in the back of Instant Messenger because you didn't accept them. And all of a sudden I'll see there's all these notifications. I mean, I've had international notes of people that are just affected by understanding that this is a thing. And I hear that a lot. What's this HIV what's a thing? I don't know why they call it a thing constantly. But he really did crack the kind of Rolling Stone, pretty cool. It was the first time they wrote an article of any sexual nature post Virginia Tech. Remember Virginia Tech? When the female reporter didn't do her fact-checking, found out it really was a lie, she made a story up, and then Rolling Stone got their ass handed to them, literally. So the legal department, when they looked at me, I said, "Oh, really? Do you want my record of trial?" And they're like, "Well, do you think?" Boom. I was the quickest. They called me. They were actually in tears. They couldn't believe it happened. These were attorneys. They called me. The guy who called me literally teared up with me on the phone. He's like, first, we didn't think this was real, but then when we saw the record of trial, so for a bunch of lawyers, they this really happened? What facts are there? What evidence was there? They just were overwhelmed, and the story was approved, and it went. That was a big deal for them because they really did get sued over Virginia Tech side. But with the Rolling Stone article came, and it's the first time we really can say his name because Brandon said, we were talking about how we want to bring people's names into spaces. Brandon Gutierrez. Brandon Gutierrez is the young Air Force airman who we worked very closely with. I was just so honored to be able to be pulled into as kind of like an advisory piece. Allison and I with OutServe SLDN, and Dr. Ben Young. If everybody knows Ben, we all love Ben. I love Ben. The most incredible, passionate, as we all have, infectious disease doctors. He came in pro bono and was the expert. They were overwhelmed. Could you imagine reading Ben Young's, credentials? I mean, they're like,
Ken,
sure.
We're going to have to wrap because
Yeah, on this,
Kerry.
yep. And we'll do the call with Kerry. But Brandon Gutierrez, we got him off on the assault charge, but sadly, new commander came through, and trust me, all commanders, we can do what we want. They ended up kicking him out. Brandon was kicked out of the Air Force just a few weeks ago, but he's happy and he's okay, and hopefully we'll get him linked into this. But Brandon Gutierrez just survived, being criminalized and kicked out of the Air Force, but thank God didn't have to go to Leavenworth like I did.
Yeah.
So let me call.
So we're going to continue the
I'll take a break.
conversation, but we're going to call Kerry Thomas.
Go. I'll just step aside and get
Okay. Monique, you've written a book, and you've been doing some things there locally in your community. So tell us about that.
Well, I've written the book in 2010. But I wrote a book. What I'm doing now, I am actually doing a short film of my criminalization life. They're going to actually do it of HIV criminalization. It's called A Silver Lining. It's a 30-minute short film. So I'm excited to release that soon. So I told y'all, I'm moving forward. I'm going to be that voice for Tiffany. I'm going to be that voice for a lot of women. We need more advocates, women, to help us change these laws. I need more of you all to help me empower so many other people so that they won't be on the sex registry list. So people like Tiffany can enjoy her children like I enjoy my children. So people like Tiffany could travel the world like I travel the world. And I'm not trying to preach. But I personally want to say thank you to Sean. Sean, if I didn't meet you, I think I probably would have been in silence. I probably would have been, felt like I was a nobody. I probably would have felt like I really just went out there and harmed somebody. So Sean, if I didn't meet you, I wouldn't have been standing right here today, and I wouldn't be able to allow my voice to be heard. Because HIV criminalization, like Robert was saying, it do follow us. When I was going to build a house, I had to turn in my military form, my DD-214. And at the bottom of my military form, it says, serious offense. They kept asking me, what is serious offense? So when we have to rewind our lives and talk about our lives, it's a heaviness on us. When we sit in spaces like this, we have to replay our lives. So Sean, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for allowing my voice to be heard. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay, Gabe, you got him on your side? Hi, Kerry, brother.
Yes, how are you?
Good. Can people hear him? You got him? Got him out there? No, there's Mike. We actually have a direct link in, and Gabe is watching me. If we could turn him up just a little bit. Yep.
Can you guys hear me okay?
A little better? Not coming through the audio? Yeah, no, we got you here. I'm just trying to get the audio up in the side if we switched you over. How you doing?
Okay.
All right. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm on a speaker. Is my coming through okay? I need to pick up the handset.
Better?
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you now. We're just
Perfect then.
We're good.
I hear you guys just fine as well.
Oh, awesome. I love having you on. It's so incredible. We're so thankful. I tell you, I know they're there if they're listening, but we're so thankful those guys support you for doing this each time.
Yeah, the facility's come a long way, definitely.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I wanted to touch on a little bit today as well.
Yeah, I'm just going to let him roll. So Kerry, you've been through this before. If you can imagine, you're in a room full of very loving people, about close to 250, 260. Going to go to the mic. I'm going to let you kind of do your thing because you talk so eloquently. So everybody, this is Kerry Thomas. Go for it, buddy.
How's everyone doing today? Yeah, I tell you guys what, I always look forward to get an opportunity to meet with you guys. I mean, I kind of put that on my calendar as an opportunity to come out and kind of get re-energized, and this year is no different. One thing I think has been a great year as far as HIV activism in general, especially in such a politically, I'll put it, challenging environment. And with the upcoming midterm elections, I know that you guys are putting a lot of energy into the local races that has to be at an all-time high. And I think that those are the type of things that always motivate me to keep doing the things that I can do as well. With that in mind, you'd be amazed that I'm in my 9th year at this facility, and this time I've seen just within the areas of treatment and of especially support is really growing to a great amount. A lot of that has to do with the concepts and the things I've learned from SERO as far as organization. One of the things that's real amazing right now is that they've started a peer mentor program here, which has allowed, and I'm honored to be a part of that, which has allowed me to work not only with to mentor other men who not only may have HIV or hepatitis, but also in issues dealing with depression or suicide prevention, and just guys that want to get an opportunity to come down and sit down and talk. And I think that's the energy that I get from you guys. Knowing that you guys are working so hard allows me to put all that effort into helping out in any way that I can. Kind of like I see it as doing my part. One of the concepts that we're really working on this year is the big idea, and it's kind of the concept that, again, I get from the HIV community, is about making our right decisions in the way that we treat ourselves, and then managing those decisions daily. So making those right decisions of what we're going to do early, whether or not in our prison sentence or when we come down with the chronic illness, making the decisions about our care as early as possible, and then managing those decisions on a daily basis. And that's kind of what my year's been in focusing on that. And again, that comes from a lot from the energy that I get, knowing that there's people out there that are also just pulling 100% and willing to get together on a yearly basis, if not a daily basis, to help for the cause.
That's awesome. What have you, can you tell us anything you've been doing? You know, how's life? What's the update? You got grandchildren, all that good stuff?
I do. So I think the last time we talked, I think you guys are aware that I have a granddaughter who will be 3 in September. And about a month ago, we now have a grandson as well. And so it's amazing. And the photos that I've been able to receive and the conversations, they haven't had the opportunity to come to visit yet. They're planning in September. But just on the phone, it's amazing how just seeing how the grandkids are just getting along, and my son and his wife are doing an amazing job as young parents. So yeah, I'm happy, more than happy to have Amina is my granddaughter, and Yasin is my grandson. Just amazing group of people. So I'm definitely blessed in that area. And again, that's the motivation. I think it does take, for me, dealing with HIV and being incarcerated and all the potential dramas that may come with that. One of the things that keeps me motivated is having family and friends knowing that they're supportive as well. Having a sense of a HIV community that's not behind bars, that's been supportive as well. Those are the things that keep me motivated. And that allows us to develop strong relationships inside prison as well. And again, the facility it's been I'm fortunate to be in a facility with the management team that's willing to be open and to looking at some of the changes. I get it that sometimes, or I completely understand that sometimes change is slow. Even my legal case is an example how slow the process can be. but you can pinpoint those little times in each of our lives that you see the change, and sometimes that has to be enough, and I can appreciate that, and those are the little steps that keep me as an individual pushing through.
Sean or anybody, did anybody have any questions?
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and go into Q&A. So, Kerry, if you can just hang on for a good 10 minutes or 11 minutes, we may have some questions for you from the audience. As well as
great.
Okay, as well as our panel. So anyone have any questions, please come down. And they are coming.
Or are we ready?
Yeah.
Well, you can just line up at the mic, or we can bring a mic to you if you don't feel like getting up. Just raise your hand and Kamaria will come to you. All right, Kerry, you want to go first?
Hi, Kerry. This is Kerry, an advocate in Indiana. We share a name. I have a question for you. I've been in advocacy now going on 2 years in our state of Indiana, and I've been working with people who've been criminalized and currently have friends who are serving time, some who may be there for several years. And my question for you is, for those of us on the outside trying to help and make change, what can we do to support you when you're doing time? What can we do for those who are incarcerated to help them get through this injustice and basically to survive the experience of incarceration while you're being incarcerated? Any kind of advice for us?
Sure, that's an excellent question. And again, what I've learned over time, the things that are most important to me is just to know that there's a person that I can reach out to and that I can talk to. I share a lot of time with guys in here that the moments are actually very, very slow and drawn out. I mean, there's the prison for me is about a routine of doing the same things over and over again. But the days and the years, they seem to go a lot faster. And it's those moments that we're stuck, those moments that we're in our cell and locked down. Those are the times that we know that just sometimes having that constant contact with people that are outside that are supportive and that are encouraging and letting us know that the legal system can be drawn out. It's those moments, just knowing that someone's there for you, it goes a long way. Also, it's just as much information as possible. I think that what I've been able to do over the years to put together, if, for lack of a better term, a packet, if not a survival guide, what to do in prison, especially with your legal system, with the legal system, and especially with dealing with issues that are regarding anything HIV and criminalization. But also, it's important to know the rules of the current institution you're at, and most institutions, I believe, will have a form of policy and procedure. And I always encourage people, the more information you have about those issues, the better. And it's kept me and the people that I work with, it keeps them out of a lot of situations simply on lack of understanding. And again, I correlate that to what it means to be HIV positive and being managed in my own care, especially when it comes to the medical department. Because that sense of empowerment is, again, something that gets you through those days. So in an environment that seems so out of control, the little bit of control that you can get in managing your own care, the way that you choose to do your time, that little sense of control goes a long way. And having outside support from people that, whether it be through, most facilities now have the ability to have email, whether it's simply an email saying, hey, hang in there. I think I'm really fortunate with the people at SERO. I'll get an email every once in a while that'll just something just random and that gives a lot of support, and that goes a long way. If it's someone on the other end of the line that accepts a phone call to see how your day is going, that goes a long way. So those are the things that I think that for people on the outside, we always recognize that you guys' lives are busy and our lives are more routine driven. But when I know that people out there are supportive and are willing to take the time to just to say, hey, we care, just like you guys are doing today, it goes a long way.
And just so you know, Kerry, we have 4 delegates from the state of Idaho that are present here that are really fighting hard to bring reform there in Idaho. So just want you to know that.
Idaho's coming a long way. I mean, I've been like you guys know, I've been positive since 1988, and seeing Idaho grow to the point where there's actually, that I know there's actually support and people that are working hard, not just for me as an individual, but for the community as a whole. And again, I'm willing to help out in any way that possible that they need.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, they definitely heard you. Next question,
Okay.
Teresa.
Thank you, Robert. So my name is Teresa. I just want to say thank you to all the panelists, and thank you for talking about intersectionality work, because that's what I do. As a woman living with HIV, I also work in reproductive rights and justice for women living with HIV. So my questions to Monique. Thank you for your passion that you bring to this work. Because we talked earlier about you foster parent and adopting a little girl. For women living with HIV, especially Black women, who want to go on and build upon their family, or maybe never had a chance to have children, or lost their own children, want to foster and parent a child. What was your process? What would you say for a woman who wants to go ahead and adopt a woman without their HIV always being at the center of that, for being positive for adoption?
What I would say for all the women who just want to adopt and foster, wherever you live at, first research, do all the research that you need to research in your local areas, and do the thing. Go for it. You want to adopt. Don't allow the system to stop you. So pretty much, it's all about research. Make sure you in the right adoption agency, in the right, make sure you're going down the right road. Research it, find the facts that you need, and do the paperwork.
Did HIV become a factor when you did your adoption?
The only factor was when they saw my serious offense on my military record.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take a question over here.
We're going to jump to the live stream question.
Go ahead.
Mark?
Hi, we're doing the live stream on Facebook right now, and we have a lot of people watching, and there are a lot of them are very interested in the fact that a lot of you were in legal jeopardy because of the non-disclosure laws. And they're asking very practical questions about, well, what should we do about this disclosure situation, at least until the laws are changed? In other words, does everyone need to be asking more questions of their partner when they enter into a sexual relationship with somebody? Should they fill out forms? Should we be providing forms for people to sign saying what your status is? I mean, I know to us it may sound a little nuts, but and yet I know a lot of people with HIV who are doing exactly that. And then of course there is the point of these laws are wrong. We shouldn't have to be engaging in any of these sorts of jumping through all of these hoops. But these are the very practical questions that a lot of our viewers are asking right now.
I would say you definitely, both sides should be asking questions in regards to one's sexual. Both sides should be asking questions. There definitely should be shared responsibility. And I would say do all that you can in any way that you can to do your best to disclose your status, but understand that it's not always safe to do so. And of course, if we want people to disclose, then we need to make it legally safe to do that. And unfortunately, right now, it's not. Okay, we'll jump to your question, Susan.
Yes, hi, yes. Kerry Thomas, good morning. It is an honor to be able to hear you again this year. I have a question about Kendrick Lamar and Pulitzer Prizes. I want to know this because I think this has such potential. We all know that Kendrick Lamar won a Pulitzer Prize, first person ever to win that, is not a classical and jazz performer in writing, songwriting, social justice writing that became performance art. I want to put this question to you, Kerry Thomas. Do you have a collection of writing that you yourself, your story, you would like some genius like that, or writer like that, to come and create your story to share, to save lives, to be this story with us, for us, about you, to create and make it into performance art? Have you thought of that?
Well, first off, one of the things that gets me through my days here. They have different hobby crafts that you have as option to participate in. They can be artwork, they can be crochet, those type of things. And I joke with some of the men here that I journal a lot. I mean, that's the kind of I really enjoy reading. And over the years, and it's not necessarily an orderly sense of journaling. It's more of just a way to get my thoughts out. So I've never actually thought about putting them in any kind of format to where and shared. That's something I would have to really think about. But yeah, I do enjoy the concept of sitting back, and I'm a very early morning person. I like to get up around, believe it or not, 4 o'clock in the morning because it's quiet. I mean, I think one of the things that I would take away from prison once this experience is over is the amount of noise and constant movement. And 4 o'clock in the morning or so, it's quiet. And for me, that's the best time that I can get a lot of journaling in. But as far as working with Mr. Lamar, I've never even considered where I would begin to start to tell my story, to tell you the truth.
Thank you, Kerry. We have at least 2 questions, and we've pretty much got 1 minute of time. Are your questions for Kerry, or are they for those of us at the panel? Oops, in the middle.
I don't need a mic. I'm loud enough. The question is, most of us is new here, so most of us don't know everybody's story. So can you just give us like a 5-second snippet of what happened, and that's it?
No, we're not going to do that in this space. You can go online and actually capture our stories, Monique, Ken, and myself, and even Kerry Thomas's story. So we won't going to do this in this space, but we definitely can give you the links to their story.
And grab us outside.
Yeah, and we're here. You can ask us. You can
grab
talk
us
to
outside, anywhere.
Yes.
Brian.
Was there another? Brian.
Please, sorry, Brian. Please do use the mic because we are live streaming, and also if people are hard of hearing, it can be difficult.
Yes, as someone who's been incarcerated, I know that a lot of times when people have sex offenses like child molestation or those kind of things, but having being incarcerated for HIV non-disclosure, do you catch any flack from other inmates, or how is the climate around your charges and how people treat you?
Yeah, another excellent question. And it's for me, again, I've been fortunate to have been around guys for a long time, and so it's not as in the media as much. But on the other hand, there still is the stigma. I think that the biggest thing is the misinformation, just like outside of prison. I think that sometimes the conflict that I have had has been based off a lack of knowledge, and that's the challenge, to get more information out there. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still prison. There's still a lot of negativity that comes with that. But the way that I've chose to deal with it is more of a conversation, not so much of a resistance. Staff here, they make an effort to treat all the populations fairly, especially from my observation, again, with the HIV community and the hepatitis community. My optimism says, and my observation has been, that the more information that we give the inmate population, the less those instances happen. There's still going to be the segments that are resistant, and they always want to be somewhat of a, for lack of a better term, a hierarchy. Personally, I just try to avoid those situations in general and try to minimize those confrontations as much as possible. But at the end of the day, I think that the more education we get out there, and whether it be from medical, from the mental health staff, from just the general approach of the administration, goes a long way. And to Idaho's credit, allowing me to participate in activities like this. I did a newspaper article when SERO did their Turn It Up magazine. A lot of those issues came here, and I was hesitant at first on how that would be received. And to my surprise, more often than not, guys, it was an opportunity for men to ask questions. And maybe that's the best way to change that, is to put more information out and allow people to feel an environment they can ask questions. It's hard. Initially, I'm like, man, it's got those uncomfortable questions on why are you here, that you're out trying to infect people, all the things that people hear that are convicted under criminalization statutes, that you're deliberately trying to cause harm. It's a big hurdle to overcome, and it forced me to definitely get out of my comfort zone. One of the jobs I took was more in order to get out of my comfort zone, and this is a little background again. When I first started getting involved in SERO, I had a job where I was away from most of the population. But if I'm going to believe what SERO believes in, which I do, then it required for me not to hide. And so I took a job that's more open and more around more people. Because if I believe in the concept of SERO and everything that you guys are doing at your conference, then Kerry Thomas can't hide in a corner and only accept the help. I have to be willing to live the help that I'm asking for. And so that's one way to get out there. I've had to get out there, and I call it rip the Band-Aid off and go with it. And to my surprise, most of the men here are very open to that. I'm not sure if that answers your question directly or not, but that's just been my experience.
Yeah, that definitely answered the question, Kerry. And we are out of time right now. And Kerry, thank you so much. You know, we always hold you in our hearts and definitely lift you up when we're out there speaking about HIV criminalization. So I just want you to know that. And we have your photo up.
Anytime.
Yeah, we have your photo up so people know who you are. And thank you all for your time and your questions today, and we really appreciate the opportunity, and just continue to lift us up in your hearts and minds and in your advocacy.
Please help me thank the panel. So as we are going to have the California panel head up here for our next panel. Again, thanks to the survivors panel for sharing and being so generous in sharing their stories with.
Hi, it's Mark King, and we're back here taking a brief break during the HIV is Not a Crime Training Academy. We've just heard from several people who have been criminalized, or in one case, under the threat of being criminalized by these criminalization laws. Oh, some people are getting some love up there from the panel, and they're preparing another panel. But while we do that, I wanted to introduce you to Vanita Ray, who is with the Southern AIDS Coalition and one of my favorite people to talk to about such things. You are an attorney, and first of all, what's your response to everything we just saw from this panel of people?
It's always such an emotional response, and then anger, because it is so unjust that people have to experience this, and that we lose the humanity in punishing people for having an illness. So I get frustrated, I get emotional, and then I get determined to continue to fight.
They were very focused on, they wanted to move forward. A lot of these folks have told their stories before, and I guess they're kind of at the point where they're like, but I have a life and I want to move on with my life, which I appreciate. And I'm also thinking, though, a lot of our viewers are probably wondering, well, what exactly happened to them? And I know that in many of these cases, they were prosecuted either under a non-disclosure law, an HIV-specific law saying you should disclose, or some other law because they didn't disclose, even under circumstances where no one else was harmed, that nobody else was put under any harm. Is that the general landscape of what these prosecutions are, what's happening under these?
The very capable hands.
Yes, that's basically it. Non-disclosure is typically what people are being prosecuted under, and exposure under those kinds of laws are why the panel is about.
I got to time these breaks better because we're already on to the next panel. So I'll get back to you, and let's go back to our panel.
That was incredibly powerful. Before we get started, just a quick logistical thing. I know some people think they have loud voices and don't need to use the mic when asking questions or making comments. I want to really ask folks to use the mics. Even if you have a loud voice, if people are hard of hearing, it can be hard for them to hear, and we don't want to put them in the position of having to ask people to repeat themselves, right? So in terms of creating an accessible space, that's part of our commitment. So let's try to keep that in mind and hold that together. And I want to, even in workshops and things like that, think about how you can hold accessibility. So On to our panel. So, just again, regrounding us in that incredibly powerful morning. Thank you to the survivors for reminding us of the urgency of changing these laws and that we can't afford to waste any time, and that our mandate is not only to repeal these laws, but to really understand how they impact people's lives and to work to change those things as well, right? So we must work on expungement. We must work on removal from sex offender registries. We must work on what post-incarceration release policies look like and how people are supported in a system that actually cares for them. And we must find ways to support people who have been criminalized, including while they are incarcerated, right? So we talked last night a bit about Nushawn Williams, who certainly could use more support from this community. We also have Michael Johnson. There are lots of folks out there. And we are in a political moment where folks are facing increasing criminalization in all kinds of forms. And we need to be very clear that our mandate, yes, is to repeal these laws, but people are under increasing threat of prosecution and conviction today for lots of different reasons. And particularly, we should be very concerned about and thinking about immigrants in this moment who are extremely vulnerable, are being targeted at disproportionate rates for detention, deportation, incarceration, surveillance, policing. Immigrants living with HIV, there was just a transgender woman who died in an ICE facility just a few weeks ago, a transgender woman living with HIV. That happened on US soil, right? So this is our responsibility to fix. All of these criminalization issues are interlinked. And so something for us to think about as well is how we can engage immigration groups in our coalition efforts, and also how we go to their tables, because we don't just expect folks to come to our tables, right? Our struggles are connected, they're interlinked. So why we're here today, we want to give you a real sense of what happened in California, what it took to get our laws changed, and what went down when we tried to change our laws. So yes, we were in California, which is usually, understood to be a very progressive state. But let's be clear, it wasn't always easy. Our work started in Grinnell, just like Colorado, and Colorado modernized their laws first. Okay, so we didn't get a perfect law, but we made some major steps, and our panelists are going to talk about that. And I do want to give a shout out to Ayako Miyashita, who's not here today, but who is one of the most instrumental people starting right at Grinnell at the first HIV is Not a Crime conference. She's an attorney and worked at the UCLA Williams Institute, which is like a legal policy think tank, and did a lot of the formative research that we use to help ground our changing of the law, and has just been a huge champion. So what we were up against in California, we had a bunch of different health and safety codes that we were trying to address. We had a general willful exposure misdemeanor statute, which was not HIV specific, which had been on the books since 1939, that we were trying to address. We also had some HIV specific health and safety codes, a felony for unprotected sex while HIV positive. We had an organ, semen, blood donation, breast milk felony as well. We also had a couple things in our penal code. We had a felony sentence enhancement for rape and statutory rape, and we had a felony sentence enhancement for solicitation or perceived solicitation, meaning sex work, right? So based on some great research that was done by the Williams Institute, which I mentioned is this a think tank basically affiliated with a law school at UCLA, we learned, based on their research, they did a comprehensive review of all of the cases that had happened in California that they were able to uncover. And this is very hard data to get. But it was really important data because it gave us a picture of what was actually happening in our very progressive state, right? So what we found is that of the convictions, there had been, I think, over 800 convictions related to HIV status that they were able to find over about a 20-year period. 93% of those did not require conduct that is likely to transmit HIV. None of them required actual transmission. There was disproportionate targeting of women and people of color. So in California, women are about 13% of our epidemic, cisgender women, because we do not have good data on trans women. Cisgender women are 13% of our epidemic, but we were 43% of the people who came into contact with the criminal justice system based on HIV status. And women of all races were impacted by this. We also found that Black and Latinx folks were 2/3 of those targeted by these laws, even though that is about half of our epidemic in California. So there were very severe racial and gender disparities. And we have no idea, but we suspect that the impact on people of trans experience was also has also been really extreme. We don't have good data on that because we know that the criminal justice system frequently misgenders people, usually misgenders people, right, when entering them into the record. And so, but we also know that people of trans experience are disproportionately targeted by police, especially under things like a solicitation statute, right? So often just walking down the street, you've heard the expression walking while trans. So just walking down the street, you may be targeted by law enforcement, whatever you're doing. If you are a person of trans experience, especially a person of trans experience of color. And so, importantly, as we're looking at these disparities, I think it's important to understand who wasn't targeted, right? So white men are 40% of California's epidemic, but represented only 16% of the cases. And let me be clear, nobody is saying white men should be criminalized more. But it's important to understand that there are very, real racial and gender disparities in how these laws are applied, even in places like California. So I know that a lot of folks have district attorney races on your ballot this year. How many folks in this room have a DA race on your ballot this year? These are really important races. They really matter. Your district attorney can determine things like how these HIV laws are interpreted, how they're used, how they're applied. They can be your allies or your opposition in working to reform these laws, and not just HIV criminalization laws, but also things like money bail systems and other things like that that we know really impact our communities. So please pay attention to those races. They're so important. So that is the context in which we entered into this work, starting in about 2014. In the summer of 2014. And we have an incredible panel here today who's going to talk to you about, kind of what we did. So we're going to hear from Arneta Rogers, the Policy Director at Positive Women's Network USA. We're also going to hear from Craig Pulsipher, State Affairs Specialist at APLA Health in Los Angeles, California. And we're going to hear from Scott Shottis, the HIV Project Director at Lambda Legal, who has litigated cases and is based in Chicago, but if you work in criminalization, he's just like on a plane everywhere, working on everything. And finally, we're also going to hear a video message from a state senator in California, Senator Wiener, who was instrumental in authoring and being a champion on our bill. And, today we have this widespread movement across the country where folks are working to reform, modernize, repeal their laws, working often in coalition with other folks, and we were part of a wide coalition in California, a statewide coalition. And so I want to ask our panelists to, think about, as folks are working on this in their own states, what can you share that will be really useful to people who are going back home, trying to do this work, about not just what worked, but what was really hard about what we did, and be as honest as you're willing to. And making legislation and passing legislation is a sausage-making process. And we want to be very real about that, because sometimes it requires different kinds of compromise. You get opposition from corners that are sometimes unexpected, even folks you think are your allies, right? When we bring up the issue of targeting people living with HIV, because there's so much stigma and misinformation out there. So I want to ask you to be as, as real as you are willing to be. And we're first going to start off by hearing by Craig on talking about a little bit about how we formed our coalition, how we structured our coalition, and our work. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. This is my first HINAC conference, so very happy to be here today. Just going to share a few key lessons learned in terms of the structure and formation of our coalition. I actually got involved in this work in 2014, right after Grinnell, and it was not easy. I mean, it took at least 2 years, I'd say, for us to really get to having, I think, a well-functioning coalition that had the right people at the table. And it took a lot of work and a lot of meetings and discussions of kind of thinking about who needs to be there and how we need to structure the coalition to get to that place. So I'm just going to share a couple key lessons learned, and then maybe we can come back to questions later. But I think one of the first key pieces is identifying your key allies and who you need to be at the table very early in the process and making a concerted effort to have them at the table. Just to highlight a few of those key groups that we had involved, one of them particularly that was very instrumental in this process was public health organizations. So I'm sure folks know that public health tends to be a very consistent and effective message on this issue. The fact that these laws are outdated, they're not effective at reducing HIV transmission, and that was one of the key strategies that we used when moving this forward. And so having public health officials and doctors who could talk about this were extremely effective. And so we actually engaged the Health Officers Association of California. It was a coalition of local health officers, and it turns out that one of the biggest opponents to the legislation that we moved forward was our state Department of Public Health. And we might talk about this a little bit more. But in the end, it was very important to have those health officers so that when the state public health department, who of course the governor listens to, were opposing the bill, that they could step up and say, you know, we are health officials and we believe that this bill is important. Of course, another key group are folks who are directly impacted, people living with HIV, particularly in the case of California, people engaged or suspected of engaging in sex work, and making sure that those folks are at the table and have an active role. I think probably every legislative hearing that we had, I think we had either a doctor or a health official and a person living with HIV there to testify. And that was, you know, those folks together, I think, were very effective messengers in convincing elected officials. Another key group is having your legal experts. I am not a lawyer, and there were many issues that were beyond me, and so having some legal expertise at the table, this issue gets complicated, and it gets complicated quickly, and so having folks at the table who, you know, have a very good understanding of this issue, they can draft amendments when necessary. In California, as Nana mentioned, we had the folks at the Williams Institute, IDAHO, and of course, Scott Shaddis and the folks at Lambda Legal, who have very broad expertise on this issue, and they were critical to these efforts. So again, this took time. The coalition of, you know, bringing these people together, it took at least 2 years or more to get everyone there, and so not going to paint the picture that it was easy, and it took a lot of work, but really, you know, doing that effort early is extremely important. The other piece I just wanted to share was the importance of kind of defining your key roles and responsibilities and establishing guiding principles for the coalition. I'd say for the first 2 years, we just kind of had a coalition, and we would meet once a month for 2 hours. The meetings were not that effective. I don't think we made a ton of progress. A lot of that was because we were trying to find an author, which took a very long time to do. We found out later that a couple of the reasons it was so hard to find an author, one, of course, is that this issue, you know, it's a sticky political issue, and a lot of elected officials are unwilling to take it on, even in a place like California. The other thing is we found out that there was a perception in the Capitol that our coalition was too big and unwieldy and unwilling to compromise. So folks felt that, you know, we had our model legislation that we wanted to move, which was very true. But they felt that we wouldn't be willing to make changes as necessary throughout the process. And so a couple things we did was we restructured the entire coalition, and so we actually formed a smaller steering committee that was made up of the bill sponsors, and those folks were kind of able to, make decisions about amendments that needed to be made. And then the steering committee also fed out into larger work groups, and so we had different work groups working on different pieces of the bill, and so we had a legislative committee, we had a grassroots committee, we had a legal committee, legal, legislative, grassroots committee, the lobbying folks who are in Sacramento lobbying on the bill, and then the communications committee. And so really having those defined roles and responsibilities helped the coalition to function a lot better and be more adept when changes needed to be made. And the other piece was having clear guiding principles. So of course we had our model bill that we wanted to move forward, but we had to sit down very early in the process and say, what are the key things that are important to us so that when we have to make amendments and we need to make changes, we can look back at these and say, this is what we agreed to, and is this consistent with those guiding principles? So I won't go into what all of them were. There were actually only 3 or 4. And so we didn't make a long list of guiding principles, but a couple in particular were, meaningful involvement of people living with HIV and making sure they were at the table. And the other was not leaving sex workers behind. And that's a piece that Naina mentioned, is that 95% of the people in California who were impacted under the sex worker statute. So we made this very clear to the author, and of course, luckily we had an amazing author who was very committed to this as well, but we made that very clear in the beginning that these were very important to us as a coalition and things that we would not be willing to compromise on. So those are just the 2 key messages I would drive home is, identify your key allies, build a broad coalition, and also establish key roles and responsibilities and guiding principles for the work. So I'll stop there and pass it on.
Great, thank you so much, Craig. And just so folks know, we're going to have time for questions at the end after we hear from all these folks. So we're going to hear from Arneta next on some of the grassroots work and PWN's role and sort of how that went down.
Great, thank you, Naina. First, I just want to thank the panelists from our survivors panel and grounding us in why we're all here and doing this work. So PWN, as you all know, is a national organization, but our national office is actually based in Oakland, California. And so it was really critical that we be a part of this campaign and have been a part of the campaign since the beginning. For the reasons that Naina outlined, the gender and race disparities, we really also thought it was imperative for us to really bring that analysis to the overall work that we did in the coalition. And then a lot of it was also about MIPA centering the meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. And so we did a lot of community education and mobilization work in our local area. So since California is such a big state, there was local organizing going on in the LA area. We tried to do some work and education in the Central Valley, and we really focused on the San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area. And as you all know, Oakland is a place that is also marred with a lot of health disparities that are also rooted in those same racial and gender disparities that have been drivers of the epidemic and drivers of HIV criminalization. And so in our work, in our education, in our mobilization, we wanted to also center building the political power for those same reasons that Naina outlined, because we knew when this fight was over, we needed to be able to mobilize folks on addressing those other issues. We wanted to work on also decriminalizing sex work and focusing on harm reduction policies. And so I would just stress in your work as you're doing that education and the mobilization and the grassroots work that you also think about what's next for this coalition that we're building. What other campaigns do we need to be allied with, and what else do we need to be in service to? What other communities do we need to be in service to? Immigrant communities, folks of trans experience, sex workers who were disproportionately impacted by the laws in our state. Other things we did, there was a advocacy day that was organized by one of the other co-sponsors on our bill, Equality California. So we actually held some legislative trainings before that lobby day to make sure that our folks in the community were actually educated about the impacts of the bill and speaking to legislators. It was, Wahida Shabazz El always says, we have to have the meeting before the meeting. So we made sure we had the meeting before the meeting to make sure our folks were actually educated and ready to speak about the impact of the laws in their lives. Something that we also often speak about and the impact that in the gender analysis that we bring is that these laws it's a form of structural violence, but they also open folks up to interpersonal violence. And so that was a message that we really drove home in the public testimony that we provided before the committees, before the legislators. I'm actually really pleased that we had a young advocate who was new to advocacy, Tondi Harris, who I just have to shout out. Hey, Tondi. Young woman living with HIV who was new to the process and actually provided really compelling public testimony before the Public Safety Committee and our legislator in California, and working with her on that. And so, yeah, so we just really, as, you know, bringing in our gender and racial justice analysis and the stories of our members, we elevated that in the legislature, and, you know, in public testimonies, and also really elevated that analysis in other movements throughout the state of California, which I think is also important in building grassroots support. So yeah, I heard somebody, I think Teresa was talking about that this is a reproductive justice issue, and so we actually elevated this issue in a statewide reproductive justice coalition, and wound up getting more reproductive justice organizations to sign on in support of our work. So, you know, as you're thinking about advancing your bill in your state, you know, think about what other movements do we need to be aligned with and coalitions that we need to be working with. And then going back to that piece about centering the meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. You know, this is a sausage-making process, as was mentioned, and so when the bill got to critical stages in our campaign, Nana and I, we actually, you know, we convened a group of outside stakeholders of people living with HIV that were leaders in this movement, and, you know, asked for advice. You know, is this legislation that we want to move forward with? Would this be a good model? People are going to be looking to California. We are, you know, we're known to be this very great progressive state. This is where we have a lot of room to pass comprehensive legislation. Is this the legislation that we want that's accountable to our community? And so I think if you have an opportunity to do that, and, you know, people living with HIV should be leading the effort, but also if you could consult with people living with HIV in those critical stages to make sure you're being accountable, I think that's really critical. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Excellent. Really great points. So Scott Shadas from Lambda Legal is now going to talk to us now about a little bit about institutional and public opposition and some of the strategies we used.
Thanks, Nana. Hi, everyone. Good to see everyone's faces again, and newcomers. Glad you're with us now. I'm Scott Shadas. I'm the HIV Project Director at Lambda Legal. I've been working on this now for a while. I'm not even sure I want to say how long, but it's been the whole time really that I've been at Lambda Legal, which is going on 11 years. And so, yeah, I wanted to talk first. I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the structure stuff, because I think it's so important that we had a working structure and a trust that had developed between the principal players over that amount of time, right? Craig talked about how it took us a little while to pull things together, and the fact is it did, but that helped to then develop those relationships and that relationship of trust. I mean, we didn't really get to guiding principles until 2 years in, and that felt very early in the process, because it was early once we had started sort of down the road of legislation, but indeed, we'd already been working together, and I think that made it easier to develop those guiding principles and whatnot. I also want to acknowledge Craig's role, which he didn't talk about too much, but Craig is with APLA Health and was really the sort of the manager of the whole process. So yes, we had all these committees and we had a steering committee, but without someone kind of at the helm, making sure that everybody was moving toward a goal together, we wouldn't be able to get this done. So I want to mention Craig. And I also so this thing about our unwillingness to compromise as a coalition, and at the same time, our ability to get something passed, I think they were both important. Because we kind of didn't want to compromise any more than we absolutely had to. And at the same time, we needed to be a coalition that could be somewhat nimble. So developing that structure where we had broad input from a lot of people, but then we had it structured in a way that we could actually move the bill and make decisions quickly was critical. And there was, some tension, of course, then between in that, right? And ensuring that you have the meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. So I'm just going to get a little bit real.
Get real.
And say that it wasn't always easy. It was not always easy to keep the voice of people living with HIV centered in the work that we were doing. I'm a person living with HIV myself, so my voice was often at the center, but there weren't a whole lot of, and Nana's was too, but there weren't a whole lot of people in California who were at the table that we were able to keep at the table on a regular basis. And so we did have to adapt at times and figure out, okay, well, because it involved for the principals in this process, it was weekly calls and sometimes multiple calls a week. And not everybody who has other jobs and other lives is going to be able to engage in that way. Before I get past it, I just want to shout out to the other co-sponsors in California because they all played a critical role. I can't say how wonderful it was to work with these folks. So it was the ACLU, it was Equality California, who played a tremendous leadership role. It was APLA Health and Positive Women's Network USA, and the Black AIDS Institute, and then finally Lambda Legal. Those were the 6 co-sponsors that worked together. And, as always been mentioned, the Williams Institute was critical. They couldn't be a co-sponsor of the bill because they're not allowed as a state institution to be lobbying the state, but they played a critical role in the effort. So we had to, at one point, actually bring together some HIV advocates and people living with HIV so that we could talk to them and say, okay, we're at this crossroads. We need to figure out which way to go here. We want your advice. Here's option 1, here's option 2, what do you think? So we had to be a little bit creative sometimes about actually ensuring that people living with HIV were represented and were in the decision-making process. So I'm going to talk briefly about 3 things that sort of popped up for us along the way and lessons learned. As was said, California has this reputation of being, well, it's super liberal, so this should have been super easy, right? That wasn't really true. And in part that was because we really were looking to make California a model for the country. And while we did not get a perfect bill, I don't know if there is such a thing, this one was darn close. And so it included really a lot, most of what we originally set out to do. And one of the things that we had with us, which was, as Craig mentioned, was super important, was the Health Officers Association of California. They were a part of the coalition before we had really developed guiding principles. I mean, they were there at the table with us from the get-go, which made it all the more surprising and scary when in the middle of the process, it looked like they were going to start opposing our bill, or at the very least, were no longer going to be able to support it as they had been. So that was one of the lessons learned along the way, is the import of, one, having those folks there from the get-go, and then keeping them close. And really what they were encountering was some resistance from within their organization. So then they had to spend some time, and we spent some time helping them bring along some of the folks, and really it was like one person. So sometimes one person can really drag down an entire supporter or your entire bill. Who had great resistance. And so that it was strategies around, and it was targeted toward how do we turn this one individual. I think that is an important piece to keep in mind in terms of when you're doing media, when you're doing public messaging on this issue, what's your goal with that? And who do you really need to convince to pass your bill? I'm a person who happens to believe that it would take a lot of resources and a lot of effort to turn public opinion even in a place like California. So important to know, we were fortunate that there was some polling done in California. Equality California had money to do that polling, and it was not great for us. Even within the LGBT community, even among, within the communities where we would hope our support would be greatest, it was not great. And so dealing with that and understanding, okay, are we really going to bring everyone around to our position before we change the law in this state? Or are we going to target the legislators that we know we need to convince, bring in the allies, and really try to move this along in a timely fashion. So that was an important piece, was recognizing what our goal was. There were a couple of other things that popped up along the way. One, we ended up with Bill O'Reilly picking this up and having some difficulty with that. So one of the things we learned was maybe we wanted to keep our heads down a little bit in the media, in order to move this in a way that wasn't going to get opposition all sort of riled up. And then finally, in the end, and Craig mentioned it, there's a piece around the health department, and a surprise when we thought we would have the state health department with us, ended up opposing our bill, and really opposed it until it was signed. And that is where it was so critical that we had put in place a legislator that was not only with us, but was a champion in a way that, he was almost less willing to compromise than we were. And so that ended up being absolutely critical in that decision to push the bill finally to victory. So I'll close there so we can get some questions.
Great, thank you so much. So we have a video from the senator who authored our bill. In order to have time for questions, I'm going to suggest that we show that video on the break, so that folks who want to see it can. Is that okay with the panel? Because I want to make sure that we do have time to hear from the audience. I'm sure you have questions and comments. So just to highlight again, and if folks want to start coming up to the mics, or mic runners want to start moving around, we're going to have a short time for Q&A, and we want to see if there's any questions on the social media feed. We intentionally did not go very public with our strategy. That was a deliberate decision, because we knew, the polling showed us that we had lots of opposition, right? There are lots of people who, as soon as they learn about HIV criminalization laws, are like, great, those laws should be used more. So it was not our plan to try to publicize these laws widely. Our plan was very mobilize a specific set of community, a specific target audiences like legislators to take action for us. And in the process, build power from at least from PWN's perspective, of people living with HIV, particularly from the communities most impacted by the epidemic. So we do not see MIPA as a race-neutral priority. We think that MIPA means involving people, Black and brown people in particular, living with HIV, and people from disproportionately targeted communities, including people of trans experience living with HIV, in this kind of work. And so we were also really pleased to have Transgender Law Center as one of our partners in this process, and they were instrumental. They're also right down the street in Oakland. And that was critically important. So I see we have a lot of questions. Do we also have questions on the social media, Mark? Okay. So what I want to do is actually see if we can hear a couple questions at a time. So let's take one from each side, and then I'll see if we're going to take more questions before we have the panel respond, so we can try to get as many in as possible. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alejandro Acosta. I work for Equality Florida on the modernization movement. My question was actually about the publicizing and using media, because we have found that we do have a lot of opposition, but we really have not sure how to tackle that media and how to bring some attention to it and education to the state itself.
Great question. Stay there. We're going to take a few more questions. If you want to keep standing, you're welcome to. Devin.
Hello, my name is Devin Hersey from Kansas City, Missouri. So I've been told from an advocate outside of the state of Missouri that my role is more to give like anecdotal storytelling and contribute in that way. Is there any way that you can, they told me that was my place. Is there any way that you can be a little bit more explicit in describing the role that people living with HIV have played in drafting your bill?
Thanks, Devin. Great question. Wow. Very important. Wanda.
Hi, this is more a comment or an exclamation point. Some of the things that you on this panel have said, we have a lot of new people here, and we were asked to encourage them. Every point that you brought up showed that this is a process. It's not going to happen overnight. Do not give up. And you have support here from all across the United States and even worldwide. So don't give up.
So important. Thank you, Wanda. Diane.
Hi, my name is Diane Burkholder, also from Kansas City, Missouri. I'd like to hear a little bit more about how the folks in public health kind of switched and some of the tactics they use at opposition. So we're thinking of, we're strategizing, generally having public health on board, and what are some of the ways that they might mess up the process?
Great. Okay, cool. We're tracking your questions. Sean.
I want to sort of follow up on what Alejandro was asking. The Bill O'Reilly piece, when that came out, was explicitly cited by the legislator we were working with in the Florida House as a sponsorship, and it sort of, we probably wouldn't have passed the bill anyway, but it killed that effort in that year. So I'm really curious what you would do different about the messaging, but sort of keeping it quiet versus going public. And I really hope that the data from your survey would be shared, because I'm curious to see how consistent it is with the HENI survey that we did a few years ago.
Thank you. Great. Yes.
Hi, good morning. It's Jason from Mississippi with the Mississippi Positive Network. My question is about creating your coalition. I think some states may have the same issue we do in Mississippi. A lot of the CBOs don't work together. We're not on the same page. And there's been several organizations that have tried and failed, and they're not willing to come back to the table. So how do we get everyone to the table and have the same branding and the same messaging? And what advice do you have to even just get that started, to get people to the table?
Okay, great. I see people are still coming up to the mic. We can probably only take a couple more. So if you think your question is really urgent, please stay there. Also, I want to be mindful that there may be folks who can't get up and come to the mic but do have questions. So if you are one of those people who would like a mic brought to you, please just raise your hand, and Kamari is going to bring you the mic. Yes.
Representative John McCrosty from Idaho with the Idaho Coalition for HIV Health and Safety, and along the lines of communication, particularly with regard to social media. I just wanted to find out if there are any thoughts on strategies on using social media.
Thank you.
My name is Jyotsna Gupta with the Indiana Minority Health Coalition. Coming from a more politically conservative state, I was wondering what the most effective educational programs you used were. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
My question was going back to the media. I have been burned by the media in my hometown discussing this subject, and this was with a reporter that I had already vetted as a friendly reporter, but she couldn't help but sensationalize the story. And the thing that we found that's working for us is we're actually buying media time where we control it as a public service announcement. We were lucky to get a grant from the Community Foundation to do that, but that's one solution that we found works, that we can control the message that way.
Awesome. I'm hearing, this is the last question or comment we're going to take. Please try to keep it brief so we can have our panelists respond. Thanks.
How you doing? Lionel from Dallas, Texas, PLHIV. I have a question. You talked about structure and bringing everybody to the table, but then minimizing it to a core group that makes the actual decisions. How do you go about making that decision as to who those core individuals are?
Yes, important question. We're going to take one more.
Okay, Naima O'Neill from Cleveland, Ohio. So I just wanted to hear more about your steering committee, because we're at that stage of creating one.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to know what that looked like for you, because I know what we're trying to do.
Great question.
Nana,
Social
there is
media.
one from social media. It's a yes or no. Was San Diego legislator Todd Gloria helpful?
Yes.
That's an easy one. That's an easy one. Okay, great. So we have our questions basically fall into several buckets. One is around coalition building and how to structure the coalition and how do you make decisions in the coalition, including decisions about who should be at the steering committee level. The second bucket of questions is sort of around media, including social media. And I do want to point out that for folks who want to go deeper into these questions, there are workshops on these topics. So please look at your program book. There's a whole workshop, at least one, just on coalition building. There's at least a couple on media and messaging. So please, Please go there. And there was one question also about strategies around education in conservative states. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give us their closing comments addressing whatever parts of those questions they think are relevant to them. Thank you.
Go for it. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll take the structure piece about the steering committee, since that's what I talked about. I think the decision about who was going to be a part of that steering committee or this core group, it ended up being the folks who were co-sponsors of the bill. You know, this was the group that was making decisions about amendments and, you know, those final decisions about amendments and what the language was going to look like. And so all of our organizations ultimately had our names on that legislation. And so there was some commitment to being a part of that smaller group. I think we did have some expectations of the folks who were at the steering committee. And I think the main expectation was being able to commit to participate throughout the entire process. It was fairly time intensive, so the steering committee met. We only had a half-hour meeting once a week, so we moved from like those 2-hour meetings we were doing every month to having much shorter meetings every week, which I found to be much more effective. And then steering committee members were also a part of these smaller working groups. We didn't have, you know, some groups were able to commit resources in terms of bringing people up to the Capitol. You know, so folks who had financial resources were able to commit them, but that was not an expectation for the steering committee. I think that was, I think I captured all those questions on the steering committee.
Anything else you want to say in your closing comments? One sentence.
I'll come back.
Yeah, I mean, and there was the steering committee, but then there was also the broader coalition, right? So those sort of quick decisions that had to be made were steering committee, and then those were all brought to the broader group as a part of that process. So I think that's important.
Yeah, so there was like so every week we had a 30-minute steering committee call, and then right after there was a 30-minute kind of broader coalition call where we could, you know, have a larger discussion with everyone and make sure we were getting broader input from the entire coalition as well.
Yeah, so let's see, what should I try to cover here? First of all, on the media strategy, unless you want to cover media strategy.
I was going to talk about coalition.
Okay, so on the media strategy, I would say we actually went in thinking we were going to do some, you know, sort of publicizing of this effort, in part because the legislator, of course, wanted to sort of be out there and have his imprimatur on this and be able to take some credit. And so I think what we would change, perhaps, Sean, because halfway through, we recognized, hey, this isn't actually going well. Like, we go out with positive media, and then the reaction to it and everything we're getting in response is actually doing more harm than good. And so, and Bill O'Reilly was a good example of that, right? So, and Bill O'Reilly, the strategy was to ignore it, right? We didn't want to fuel it at all, so we didn't have anybody respond to it. We didn't try to knock it down. We just let it fade, and it did, and then he didn't have a job anymore, so that was good. We made that happen, I'm sure, by ignoring him. But in general, we just decided we're going to tone things down, and we're really only going to go out when we have a message that we can control. And I think that idea that somebody brought up of, you know, hey, how about you pay for stuff and then you get to control it? Great. And other areas where we felt like we could really control the message, or we could really control the messenger, and that it was going to be a hard messenger for people to knock down, like the doctor that we had working with us who could go out and do an op-ed. So that's on the messaging piece. On the sort of involvement, or how you make sure, and I mean, I think this is always a tricky and delicate dance. So you want everyone to feel as involved as they want to be, and I think that's a key piece here is, well, you make the opportunities available for people to be as involved as they want to be, and then you need folks to also, at the same time, recognize, like, everybody has different expertise that they're bringing to the table, and having a voice doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to control the process, or that you have the skill in that particular area. So, for instance, we had a lobbying committee that was really run by folks who actually had a lobbying presence in Sacramento, and that's what they did, and they had those skills. I was not on that committee. Did I talk to that committee a lot? Yes, but I hadn't done a lot of lobbying, and Land Legal doesn't have a lobbying presence. So it's in part making it available to everyone, and then putting the people in charge of that particular committee or that process that have those skills. So that's my thought there.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, in terms of this coalition building, really strive for and push for that intersectional MIPA, making sure that it's not, it's not race neutral, that people that are most impacted are, being the representatives for the MIPA. And also pushing back against organizational privilege, for those organizations that have more resources at the table, make them accountable to community. Everybody is not contributing the same thing, but that doesn't mean their value is not, there's no equity in the value of what folks are bringing. So, you don't have to be the one sharing the anecdotes and sharing your story. You can be in the legislative meetings too, and you can be in the lobbying meetings too. And so I just encourage folks to push back against that and to actually hold folks to the fire about the resources that they can contribute.
If I could get you to hold your applause for a second. There's some breaking news out of the Supreme Court I wanted to share with people. We have lost the Colorado baker case. If you recall the case of the baker who refused to bake a cake for a GLBT wedding, the Supreme Court has just ruled against my people. So I just wanted to say that. Close out the panel and we'll go to break.
Thanks, Allison. I think it's real important to understand that there are real power imbalances in coalitions. And so those are structured by who has access and who has money and who has resources. And part of our job is to undo those power imbalances, because the truth is, we had organizations at the table that, let's be real, were primarily led by white folks, HIV negative folks, cis folks, primarily cisgender men, who were not necessarily reflective of the communities that were being most targeted by this legislation, or whose power we're really focused on building, at least from PWN's perspective, right? So this point about, yes, there are always going to be real power imbalances. They had a lot more money than we did. They had a lobbying presence. They had, more staff who could be on this. So that sets up power imbalances. And so think about how you can structure in from the beginning, early on and often, these accountability measures. Ask them for resources for things. We worked with Equality California, for example, who has lots of money, and some of the things they did were helping to sponsor food for community education events we wanted to do, so that we could engage more people living with HIV. So, really think about stuff that you can do. We got them to pay for a bus so that we could take people living with HIV to a lobby day. And we worked and we trained folks and prepared them to be at that lobby day. So really think about how you can do that. I know we're out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up, but we will all be around and available to answer your questions. And there are lots of great workshops on these topics as well. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panel.
After thanking the panel, thank you to everyone for sharing all that great information with us. And we are now going to take a 7-minute bathroom break. And when I say 7-minute bathroom break, what I mean is a 7-minute bathroom break. And then we'll take up North Carolina.
During that break, we're going to have...
Well, we're ending with some very strong words from Nana Devi of the Positive Women's Network about the power imbalances, even within activism coalitions. Really strong, important, and pointed words from Nana about those power imbalances. While we take this break, I want to point out that when we come back, we'll be speaking to activists from South Carolina about what they just accomplished in their state, North Carolina, about what they just accomplished in their state, followed by a panel of actual politicians, elected officials who have been involved in changing the laws and doing legislative work. When you get elected officials on a stage in front of a bunch of AIDS activists, you're in for a good time. So we'll see you back after the break. Thanks.
I want to thank you for inviting me to attend the conference, and I'm really sorry that I can't